And welcome. Hola, buongiorno, dumelang, molo, and hello to you beautiful women and to everybody who's watching us tonight. I'm Kathy and I'm welcoming the world to our private boudoirs, basically. We're all in our own spaces, but we're connected. And that's fantastic. It's been quite a day of Wi-Fi fallouts for so many people, but it's so wonderful to see both of you tonight. And I'm really honored and very pleased that you have agreed to join us. I actually am not going to say very much. I'm going to ask the two of you to introduce yourselves. I met one of you, Elisa, last year. Fell in love, if I'm allowed to say that, and felt her work was too significant for it to go unnoticed. And I hope we'll all feel that by the end of the night. And Candace, when I saw you, I thought, gosh, I need the two of you together. And then I discovered you've already got a podcast out. So I thought I was really doing something awesome for you two. Of course I'm not. It's not for me to make the magic and just tying my hair back. If you would like to start off, Candace, and tell us a little bit about who you are and so we know a little bit more about you.
Wonderful. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Elisa. And hey, everybody watching. We're so happy to be here. And thank you so much for giving us the space to share, because as you know, Elisa and I have a channel together called Candace and Elisa Show. And basically how we came together is our collective mission, which we will discuss later in the show. But I am a broadcaster, podcaster, and author. I've been very fortunate to be acknowledged by some incredible magazines such as Vogue magazine, who called me one of the most inspiring women in the world, an honor I carry with me. It's incredible. And I work with people to help them release trauma, resentment, and pain.
Whew, that's big. Elisa, let's hear.
I mean, I echo what Ken said. Really excited to be here. I am a journalist and cinematographer with experience working in 6 continents. I produce work for outlets like BBC, National Geographic, Newsweek, and I've covered conflict zones as well as humanitarian crises. So from the massacre in Rabah to domestic violence in refugee camps in Iraq, and more recently Cyclone Idai in Mozambique. And I'm the author of The Spiral of Containment, Rape's Aftermath, which is a traveling art exhibition addressing rape and 25 survivor stories. Oh, you're muted, Kathy.
I am too. I was muted because I have a little dog who lives in the house, and he thought he needed to be louder than you. Very powerful stories. Thank you. Your stories are phenomenal. Let's go into the real background. Let's travel the journey with you. Primary for me is both of you are storytellers. You both relate and bear yourselves open to the world, and the world can relate to you. And that's the magic. But you also take us with you, and you encompass us, and you grow us all. So let's start with you, Candice. Won't you tell us how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. So my story is rooted in South Africa. For those people who may be watching who are not South African, we have a deeply troubled past as a country, and we suffered through apartheid. So when I was 9 months old, my father was brutally murdered by an apartheid assassin by the name of Eugene de Kock. And I didn't really know this growing up. I think the realization really hit me around 8, 9, when I had found out who had killed my father, and I knew more or less why, because he was a Black man. And so when I reached around the age of 9, my mom had bought a book. It was titled Into the Heart of Darkness by Jacques Poe. And I remember whenever people would visit, she'd ask me to go get this book. And I knew that on the cover of this book was one of the men that had killed my father. And I knew in the book was a picture of my father. So that's all I could ever hear as I listened. And one day I thought to myself, I want to see what everyone sees, because it would elicit a reaction. People would scream, people would cry. And so I had an opportunity one day. My mom had left, and I ran to the room so excited. And I grabbed this book, and I saw them like about 10 faces, but I thought, okay, more or less I knew who it was. And I opened the book, and in the book was a picture of my dad's burned body clutching a steering wheel. And it was something that looked like it was a CGI effect in a movie. It was horrifying, to say the least. And I quickly closed the book, I threw it in, and I knew I couldn't tell my mom, because I knew I'd done something wrong. However, the image of my dad's burned body was forever seared in my mind and in my heart. And as I grew older, I just became so resentful, so angry, depressed. And I'd hear things such as, "You're so mature for your age," which is usually masking trauma. And around the age of 16, I was in bed just another day, and I had felt this pain in my chest, and I thought, I'm having a heart attack. So I went to my mom's room and I said, I think I'm having a heart attack. So she rushed me to the hospital. The next day after I got tested, the doctor sat us down and he said, you weren't having a heart attack, but I can tell you that you have stress symptoms in your body so severe that in my 20 years of practice, I've never seen anything like it. He said, your body's killing you, and you need to change it. Well, I don't know how to help you. And I recall that moment at 16 being a bit arrogant, like, oh, well, if I die, I die. That was really my attitude. And as the days went by and the weeks went by, I thought to myself, whoa, you're willing to die and you haven't lived. How? You are giving this man so much power. So he killed your father and now he's going to kill you. And it was that moment where it felt like my life changed. And I really started going on a journey of exploration, of finding out information. And I went on a fact-finding mission for Eugene. And I found out who he was, what he looked like, what drove him, and all these things. And I started slowly but surely forgiving him. It was an unconscious thing that I was doing, but it was just more focusing on myself. I just wanted to survive. And I got to 23 and I thought, hey, I'm happy. Like my life is doing great. And I got an opportunity. The MPA called my family and asked, would we like to meet this man who had killed my father? And for the first time, I thought, whoa, did I forgive him? What is going to happen? So we met up with Eugene. And, they set up a table. It was very much like a dining room setup. And it was members of the National Prosecuting Authorities. It was my family and myself. It was the commissioner of the prison and a priest. And a chair was open close to me. And they said, Eugene's going to be sitting here. Are you okay with that? And I said, whatever, like we can sit wherever he wants. And so we were just chit-chatting amongst ourselves. And I looked up and there he was. And for the first time, my breath was just taken away. I was like, whoa, I did not expect that. And it was, I don't know if I expected trumpets but I expected something. And so the conversation started. They introduced each of us individually. And with each one of us, he'd lean forward and say, pleasure to meet you. So they'd say, this is Candace, my daughter of the deceased Glenn Masilo, and he'd lean forward and say, pleasure to meet you, and lean back. And so, the conversation started, and he spoke about how they ambushed my father. And when Eugene was watching, because he wasn't supposed to be a part of the operation, he saw that my father was getting away. So he decided to run down the Nelspruit Bridge, and he emptied out his magazine cartridge on my father. When he still saw signs of life in the vehicle, he doused them all in fuel and he set them alight. And so he told us the story, and it was the first time we got the real facts about what had happened. And so my family, a lot of conversation happened, but my family started saying, Eugene, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you. And for some, I'm very talkative, but throughout that interaction, I was just floored. I couldn't say a word. And finally it got to me. And I said, Eugene, I want to say I forgive you. But before I do, I want to know one thing. And he looked at me and he said, yes, anything. And I said, do you forgive yourself? And for the first time, this man, who was so stoic throughout our interaction, looked away. He started fidgeting. And then he looked back at me and he said, every time a family...
Is she also muted for you, Lisa?
And so he looks away and then he dabs out of his eye. Are we back? We back? So he looked back at me and he dabbed the side of his eye and he said, when you've done the things I've done, how do you forgive yourself? And I just burst into tears at that moment. I just started sobbing. And I recall I wasn't sobbing for myself and what I had lost, but I was sobbing for the human being I saw in front of me. And I knew that there was nothing I could do to take away his pain. And so they dismissed the meeting. I got up first and I went around towards him and I said, Eugene, would you mind if I gave you a hug? And he looked at me very confused, of course, and he stumbled up and he embraced me and he held me really tightly and he said, I'm so sorry for what I've done. And your father would have been so proud of the woman you've become. And we embraced, and in that moment, we went our separate ways. I never saw him again. He never saw me again. But I knew that I had forgiven him, and I went on to advocate for his parole, which he got. And yeah, I wrote my book, and this is why I'm here now.
Oh, I know the story. I wasn't expecting the tears. So thank you for sharing. I think I better hand over to Elisa because I'm far too moved. It's such a profound story and you're an extraordinary woman.
Yeah, for me as well. I know the story, but it's always really, really powerful to listen to again. So thank you so much for sharing it, Candace. So I'm here because I was raped in 2011 by a family member in Mexico, which is where I'm originally from. And at the time, I was shooting a documentary for a production company that I'd started in Toronto. Needless to say, after this happened, the film didn't get made. I had to walk away from the production company because I couldn't pick up a camera for about a year. But what I did have was access to art therapy. And it was through art therapy that I was able to come up with this image that has just come on your screen, which is basically the feeling of being stripped bare and having the painful reminder that at some point you had wings, but they were no longer usable. So I felt stuck in this dark space, and through art therapy, I was able to visualize it. I realized that I wanted to reach out to other people, given my background, and create something that was larger than just my own story, and realized that most people were attached to a particular color in their memory. So I created the spiral of containment, Rape's Aftermath, where one survivor per color in the 24 color wheel, plus my own being black and white, would be the collective statement that we would make against rape and sexual violence. So these are some of the examples of the photographs from the exhibition. And it was very important to me to include both men and women, because even though this is primarily something that we know happens predominantly to women, the taboo for men to come out and speak about it is so vast. So at the exhibition that I held at the Oxo Tower in London, you would have actually gotten the chance to listen to each survivor contextualize their image through their own voice, and this is what it would have sounded like.
I think I was obedient in following his instructions because I was very scared of him. He was my uncle. He's my uncle. He was in jail for a very long time, for about like 15 years. We walked about 15 minutes through a graveyard. I stopped. I fought with him, beat me up, threatened to kill me, and he kept saying to me, "I'll shoot you if you run." And I believed he did have a gun because he had drugs. Through the graveyard, we walked quite a distance, and in my mind I kept reading every graveyard that I walked past. I read all the names. I read when people died. I saw that there was people that died in 2015, and I was like, I'm going to be one of these people that die in this year. He raped me again near water and near in a bush. I heard every sound in that bush. I heard the birds, I heard the river, the trees, I heard everything. And when he was busy assaulting, raping me, he kept saying, I'm doing this because I love you. It's words I can never understand what they really meant. And those are the words that I will never really ever forget. I couldn't believe a family member would do that to you. Just don't let it block you from your success. You can be something quite special, something big.
So a lot of people asked me, why would you turn rape into something so beautiful? To which I had two answers. One was that having worked as a photojournalist, I had been very frustrated at the fact that compassion fatigue is real and people don't want to be looking at harrowing images all the time. So I wanted to turn rape into something that was accessible for people. And secondly, the other reason was that I was so tired of the photojournalistic image that re-victimizes victims. Basically, that black and white battered woman look at the back of a shelter. And I wanted people to have control over how they told their story and how they presented themselves to the world. So that was the reason that I decided to do it in this way. This is an example of what a male survivor story would have sounded like.
You know, society tells you that a young boy that gets raped is lucky, but I can promise you he's not. Other people looked at motherly figures as nurturing and loving, and I looked at them and they struck fear into my life. When somebody entered into my room and that shadow came in, then I had no way of voicing my fear. I had no way of saying, hey, don't do this, leave me alone, I don't want to do this. You know, I didn't have a choice. So yeah, I was introduced to sex at the age of 5. That was normal, apparently. I felt so alone because I'd never seen or heard of another boy that this had happened to. But I think the hardest thing for me all through this was when a woman raped me when I was 12. That was the one thing. I was kind of saving myself for that special woman, and she kind of took it away from me. I think that was the one that affected me the most. Just empower your children, but don't just empower your little girls. You know, I mean, I hear everybody's like, oh, you've got a daughter, you know, I'm going to buy, have you bought a shotgun, you know? And nobody goes like, well, you got a son, are you protecting him? Just empower your children, you know, because if you don't, somebody else will.
So the title of the project, The Spiral of Containment, alludes to the cyclical nature of healing trauma. It's not a straight line. It's not a stepping ladder. It's something where you're up and you're down. And it's for that exact reason that I decided to evolve my personal photograph and turn it into a holographic projection that actually went through the whole journey of healing and feeling wholesome again. This is another of the final photos in the project, and now we'll show the hologram. So although expressing trauma through art is not a one-stop shop to we're healed, we're done, it's a journey, it's a lifelong journey, I do think that myself and everyone who participated in this project, we shifted forward in our healing process. And the objective of my work is to reframe the way we view certain social issues that we might have assumed that we understood, but presenting them in a new way to make them more accessible to people.
Whew. I'm positively exhausted. I have to say, I really wasn't. Again, I was so familiar with your work because I have the book. We've spoken through it. But to actually live through that exhibition, I'm going to just take a slight step backwards and ask you to just quickly, Elisa, explain how you've chosen to exhibit it at the OXO, which is where it met incredible acclaim, because we're seeing it up close and personal and intimately on digital media. And part of the reason you are here today is because this whole program is about living in the 21st century. It's about digital media. It's about the two, and for me, the theme was around the two of you coming together and finding your voice in a new medium beyond your immediate reality, be it in the physical present, or be it on digital media today. But for me, I know that that exhibition was impressive. So I'd so appreciate if you tell us a little bit more.
Sure. So as you entered the exhibition, you had a soundscape and
I'm going to interrupt you. It's in the OXO Tower and it's a so just provide that.
It's a dilapidated building in the center of London. So it's a 5-story gallery. And basically when you'd come in, you'd have all the costumes with a soundscape, and then you'd move into actually cycling through the color wheel. So from red, orange, yellow, through different rooms. And you actually had to walk up through the rooms in a kind of spiral-esque way and listen to everybody's voices going at the same time. And the reason they were all going at the same time is because I feel we have a bombardment of information coming our way at all times. And it's our responsibility to actually actively choose to listen and do something about it. So we had people like really going in to hear. There were props, it was multimedia, so it's photography, soundscape, and then at the end, there was a large 4-meter by 16-meter depth holographic projection, which wrapped it all up as my artist statement, basically.
Sure. It's so huge. So for me, let's take one step further now. I want to understand from both of you how this has healed you and how you've gone on to work with other people to heal them. Obviously, we've ended with you, Elisa, and I have so many questions for you, Candace. But let's start taking the journey and see why you landed where you landed and what you're doing currently to assist. And I think this is a very powerful time. Another reason I think we're together today is because the world, for the first time, simultaneously is in trauma. For the first time, the so-called Western world, so-called developed world, not so-called Western, but so-called developed world, is directly affected by this pandemic since last century. Previously, it's always been that much further from us. We didn't have it in our living rooms, and we didn't have people right next to us dying. It was always over there. Lisa, you've worked in a foreign correspondent environment. So suddenly we are all here together and we're dealing with collective trauma. Help, guys, help. Tell us how we can get through this, please. And you choose who speaks first.
That's a big prompt, Kathy. And I mean,
heal the world, okay?
And make it a better place, as Michael Jackson would say. Maybe rest in peace.
And everyone else.
Sorry, maybe it's bad. So I think for me, I mean, in the work that I do around trauma and healing, I have a very strong belief that society, we need to heal ourselves first before we focus on collectively healing the world and our communities. And I think we found ourselves in a perfect storm of sorts. We found ourselves in at the time of Corona, the time of Black Lives Matter, the time of Me Too. So it's this brewing pot of just so many things coming to the surface. And I always say to people, for me, when you realize that when you take race outside of an equation in terms of George Floyd, for example, and you look at that officer as an individual and you say, okay, all these racial maybe stereotypes aside, or we take away the notion or the idea that this man might be racist, and we just look at what causes a human being to take another life so haphazardly, so, off the shoulder. So almost there was nothing in his eyes when he did what he did. And so to me, that always comes down to what's the trauma he's feeling, what's the trauma he has not addressed, and why was he allowed to go into the police force with this unaddressed trauma. And so it's so important that as a society, we start taking accountability for our own BS. And we say, this happened to me, but it does not justify these actions that move forward or that I move forward with. Because in many ways I could have said, my dad was killed by an apartheid assassin, therefore I'm going to become a rampant racist and, just spew hatred everywhere. And I think society's got a way of condoning that kind of behavior. As soon as someone acts badly, we say, but their mother left. But their father didn't do this, but their partner did this. And we need to start saying, you cannot change another human being. It's impossible. And I think it was Mother Teresa who said, whenever you think about changing someone else, look at how difficult it is to change yourself. And we need to look at and redirect all this energy that we have to, give to the world and direct it inwards and say, why do I act so badly? Why do I treat my neighbors like this? Why do I make these off-cuff racist comments? And I think as soon as we start taking personal accountability within ourselves and we start healing our traumas and we start facing and stop running away from, I think the world will automatically start to change, because a world of more healed people can only create a healed society, a healed household, a healed community, and therefore a healed world. So I'll pass it on to you, Lisa, to elaborate.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you said, Candice. And I think what we're seeing right now, we have so many divisions in the world, whether it's culture, whether it's race, gender, language. But what's happening right now is almost like the grand unifier, right? It's not about social class. It's not about race. It's not about where you're based. There's nobody that's unaffected by this pandemic. And it's like the grand equalizer. And I think that what it's doing is allowing us to reconnect with the language that we all comprehend, which is the language of loss, the language of love, the language of pain, the language of joy. And these are things that are universally understood as humans, right? So I think, if anything, now is a time to realize that perhaps a lot of the constructed layers and divisions that we've set into place are really, truly unnecessary. And And we need to keep on growing our toolbox. Like Candace said, we're responsible for growing our toolbox for coping with what's going on around us. If we don't do that, we are unable to help other people, and we'll be unable to cope with it ourselves. And the number one way for people to turn to violence is through not processing their own problems, right? So I think, as Candace said, that is the single most important thing we can be doing. And certainly looking out for each other through these understood languages. If somebody is in pain and you can see it, you recognize that, reach out a hand, for just basic human things.
So you two have been through process, okay? For someone who's sitting out there, what would process mean? How would I, as Kathy, who might be scarred with post-traumatic stress, I was a journalist, where do I go? How do I help myself? Who helps me? Do we reach out to you? What is the process? And then I've got an addendum to that, which is, does it help heal you or re-traumatize you every time you two engage with people who are in pain, trauma, or whatever? So sorry, those were two questions. Choose the one you want to answer.
I mean, it's really, I think, coming to the first question about process and pain, I think it's very important to realize, as Elisa said in her work, The Spiral of Containment, that pain and healing is not linear. And I think as soon as you take that pressure off yourself, that it's supposed to look like this, and it's supposed to be streamlined, and I do first step, second step, third step, and I'm healed. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. And I found that for me, the first thing to do and the most important step in healing is acknowledgement. Acknowledge your pain. Acknowledge how it wounded you. Acknowledge in which arenas this wounding has spilled out into. Because without acknowledgement, it's very difficult to move forward. And I would say then the second step would be, I've acknowledged, now what, right? And for me, it's when I say take accountability, I use this word very loosely. It's not take accountability for the incident that happened. Take accountability for your emotions. And what I mean by that is, forgiveness to me is releasing yourself from the emotional attachment you hold towards an incident. So when you take accountability, you say, I did not deserve that. I did not deserve this person's come into my life and wound me. I did not deserve the trauma. And I do not think what they did is okay. However, in order for me to move forward, in order for me to become the person I was born to become, because it's so important not to be married to a narrative. And that's what trauma tends to be. It tends to be the overarching narrative of our lives. And when we don't heal it, we can die with that pain. And so the person who hurt you did not hurt you once. They hurt you again and again and again. And therefore, who really had the power over your life? This other person. Their life went on. They probably had a family, that things probably moved on. They probably didn't think about you again. But the power you gave them is that was so autonomous and so omnipresent that they became the God of your life in many ways. So for me, when I say take accountability, I mean, say, you know what? This happened and it sucked, but I refuse for this to continue to control me. I refuse for this to be the narrative. I refuse for this person to script my life. And therefore, I want to heal. I want to move forward. And taking those two decisions very consciously and very deliberately, when you do bump into those roadblocks of, process of whether you're speaking to a psychologist or you're purging your emotions, you always have your North Star, which is, I want power over my life. I deserve power over my life. And so that is the most important thing you need to start marrying. You need to leave the narrative of trauma and you need to get married to the narrative of power and say, that thing that happened to me did not define me. I am more than it. I have, overpowered it. I have overcome it. And it is so important to remind yourself of that, because sometimes when you are in a trauma or you've experienced trauma, it's so easy to look at yourself as, I'm a victim of. No, you're an overcomer of. That thing was supposed to destroy you, and it did not, you are still standing. And therefore, it's about reframing your experience. And I think realizing and giving yourself self-compassion instead of saying, I'm stupid that this thing keeps affecting me. No, say, you know what? I'm a badass that I've overcome that. Look at me. I'm still standing. I'm still, doing things in my life. And this thing that would have destroyed so many others did not destroy me. So I know it doesn't seem like a practical tool, but I would say for me, the biggest thing when approaching healing is changing how you think around it. You have to have a fluid mindset. You have to have a mindset of power, empowering yourself. And then whatever tools you incorporate, whether it's art, whether it's therapy, whether, all these practical, real down to earth, things you can do, become so much better and they become much more ingrained in your character. So I'll pass it on to Lisa.
Before you do,
Yeah.
I've got a burning question. And my burning question is, what inspired you? Did you predetermine that you were going to ask Eugene de Kock the question you asked him that changed the moment? How much work had you done prior to that? What led to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very powerful question. I hadn't even thought about what the encounter would look like. I mean, I had an idea more or less, and I thought I'd be much more chatty and much more, of myself in that exchange. But I was very quiet and I was very observant. And for me, it really came down to one thing that I know is human, whether you are seen as the most evil person, as he was that prime evil, or you're seen as a saint. All of us struggle with one thing, and that is self-compassion and self-forgiveness. And I knew for sure in that moment that if he had said, yeah, no, it is what it is, I did what I did, you guys will be fine, or he was very lackadaisical about it, I knew that I would have understood that he didn't comprehend his actions. And so for me, I didn't know what to expect. I mean, he could have completely said to me, oh, yeah, I mean, I've forgiven myself, and it would have probably changed the dynamic slightly. But it is so human in all of us to struggle with forgiving ourselves. We would much quicker forgive someone who hurts us than we would ourselves, even victims of trauma. The irony is, when I've spoken and worked with victims, the one thing they always say to me is something along the lines of, how could I have put myself in that situation? How did I not see the signs? How am I, and it's all this, taking this accountability for someone else's behavior. And so I knew for me that would be a very indicative question. And it would show me how much he had processed what he had done to me, my family, and countless, over 200 other families.
And that's a big statistic. And thank you for sharing that statistic. It's awful. Okay, so you missed the last question, but that's fine.
What about the last question?
Let's move on to Elisa, and we'll come back to many more questions. We're going to be here all night, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Elisa, your process.
Oh, my process. Okay. So I just wanted
Because
to make
you work with other people and you worked with a therapist, as you told me before.
Yeah.
And in a way, you're reliving some of that each time. But and how did you get to art? How did you get to? I know you're a photographer. I know you're a brilliant photojournalist, and I think you should be an award-winning photojournalist. But that's my opinion. And you didn't bring any of your images to share with us. But how did it become this extraordinary artwork? This extraordinary body of art, and what did you live through when you were approaching these people?
I mean, it all emerged by having done art therapy myself. So going to your original question about what to do, I think it all starts at asking ourselves, how am I doing? It's really as basic as that. Am I hurting anywhere? Where am I hurting, and why am I hurting? And just having that, little conversation with yourself. If at any point you realize that you're carrying a pain, or you're carrying an anger or a frustration or something, and you know where it comes from, there's two answers. Either you can cope with it yourself by, we have tons of resources online. We have people, friends that we can rely on. Or do I need professional support? In which case that becomes a therapeutic journey. I knew in my particular instance that I couldn't deal with this alone. The person that this happened with had been like an older brother figure for me my whole life. And as a result of this, Mexico still being quite a macho country, most of my family didn't believe what had happened and cut me out of their lives, like slowly deleting me off of Facebook without even talking to me and stuff like this. So what happened was almost as painful as the journey of losing so many people in my extended family that I've never seen again. So I was drowning, and art therapy was what got me out of it, because at that point, like Candace, I'm quite a verbal person, but in that moment, I just didn't have the words. Like, I could make something, I could visualize something, but I just didn't have the words. And I think that's the beauty of art therapy, is the ability of leading us towards expression and externalizing of what we're carrying at times where words fail us. And because I have always been incredibly interested in social justice and social issues, I just knew that it had to be something greater than myself. And even though sharing my story was important, I just wanted to do it with more people and learn about others' journeys as well. So I don't know, it just one thing led to another. Once I started talking to other people and they were like, oh, I felt like I was in a cage. I felt like I was drowning. I felt like there was a red classic convertible car. My brain just exploded. And I was like, we need to materialize these. At the beginning of people sharing their stories, I felt very hurt. And it wasn't re-traumatizing, but I would find myself often crying with them as they narrated their story, out of sometimes empathy and out of sometimes having gone through the exact same thing. But now, I receive stories of rape and sexual assault and different types of violence very often. And I just find it such a privilege that people would confide in that way and share in that way. And I think it becomes a gateway where you create this sisterhood and brotherhood, across genders, across races, where people feel understood and able to connect with others. And I just think that's incredibly valuable.
Wow.
Candace, your family, how did they respond? What was their response to your forgiveness?
Yeah. I just want to actually just touch on the question I remembered as Elisa answered hers about re-traumatization. And I think, as she said, it is such a privilege to be a portal to someone else sharing themselves with you. And I think, I've never intended to go down the forgiveness path in terms of teaching it and, writing a book about it and having a whole career. But hey, here I am. And I remember it was every incident with or every time I'd give a talk or I was on TV interviewed or whatever it was, every time without fail, 3, 4, 5 more people, if they could access me, would come up to me and they would always start with the following words: I have never told anyone this, but when I was 3, this happened, or when this happened, or this happened. Why, you're the only person I've ever been able to confide in. And I just started seeing this over and over. And I spoke at a school, and one young girl, and the teacher told me afterwards, he was like, she's never spoken. Like, she's so, just really painfully shy. And, we were so surprised that she raised her hand to speak to you. And I remember she stood up in the crowd and she shared such a traumatic incident. And she started sobbing. And I remember firstly, I was just jumping off the stage and I had to go and embrace her. But it was just one of those moments I knew that I would be, my story fortunately serves as a conduit to others' pain, and therefore being able to have that, to me, is just, it's a privilege beyond words. So I don't experience the re-traumatization as much as I am just so privileged and so grateful that I get to be this. And as far as my family is concerned, of course, this is a trauma that has really broken apart my family in terms of a traditional family structure for most. And therefore, all of us have kind of comprehended this differently. My mom is doing okay with it. My grandfather's been good. And my older brother's been struggling. He pretty much goes in between. He vacillates between I've forgiven, I haven't forgiven, I don't care, I care, So it's his process. And I think for me, having accepted that my family will never look like the traditional family or be the traditional family because of, unfortunately, the shared trauma we have, it's just about, everyone needs to do what they need to do to heal. And I would never, force feed or project or say you have to forgive because it is, so much better for you. I believe it's so important for people to live their life journey, and when it is your part to play in that journey and you can be of service, then do that. But when it isn't, I think it's very important to let people have the experience and respect that and step away when it doesn't maybe look like your experience,
Mm. Right. So now we're in COVID land. We're in 2020. We're all in lockdown. The two of you have started this extraordinary podcast. What did you call it? Not a podcast. What did you call it?
An online talk show.
Okay. And the Candace and Elisa show, correct? Now, Elisa, I know you don't want me to say this, but why is it called the Candace and Elisa show?
No, simply because we
couldn't find another Instagram handle.
Until our names are known, like Ellen and Oprah, we have got to pump them out there all the time.
I like that one. I like them both. Couldn't find the Instagram handle, and
it wasn't so much a political decision as it was a practical one, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
You had 5 minutes to go on air, and what were you going to
do? Yeah, honestly, we didn't care. Like I think, but I also think that it's actually an interesting question, because I'm pretty sure that some people would engage in that and be like, "Why Candace first?" Or if it had been Elisa, it would have been, "Why Elisa first?" And I think for us, it's just, we don't approach. Yeah, yes, exactly. But it's also, we don't approach this project from ego. And I think both of us had such a long-term vision for what we were creating that it wasn't something that mattered. We didn't care whose name came first, because Judi Dench is incredible, and she usually goes at the end of the credits as "and Judi Dench," so it really doesnme matter if you come first or last, right? It just is.
You're first, Candace. So
I am kidding. It matters all three.
So first, let's hear about what you're hoping to achieve. I know you're going to become more famous than Ellen, and more profound, and less cheesy than Oprah, in my opinion. But hey,
apparently controversial too at this rate.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I'll say about the show is that, considering our stories are just, basically rape and murder, we are able to laugh at a lot. This is something we say all the time.
Well, but the problem is that when you go and show this to the big studios, you won't be able to use this section, because I will have trashed all their major stars. But so be it. What are you, okay, more seriously, what are you hoping to achieve? What is your subject matter? How regularly do you broadcast? And obviously I want to know about your independent careers, because you're both doing extraordinary things. So let's go firstly with the on-air thing, the Candace show.
Thing. It sounds great when you say it like that.
Words, huh?
No, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak about it, Kathy. And we were very excited to do this particular conference, especially as a duo, because that's what we are moving forward. And for us, we've really dedicated like this year to really creating a show that networks will want to pick up. And we realized that for us, that there was a market, and of course I'm speaking for myself, and Elisa will speak from her point of view. But there was a realization that there was something in the market that we had that we wanted to share, but not just share out of vanity and say, I'm so smart, look at me, but share from a point of view of, we've got a very strong message of healing and hope. Mm-hmm. And we want to pass that along, and we want to do it in a way that's engaging, entertaining. People who look at us and say, oh, she looks like me, or, she looks like me, or whatever the case may be. And we're young, we're doing work in trauma, and trauma usually doesn't look like us. So I think that's our biggest goal, to really get a network to pick this up and to showcase that you can, because the world is so programmed to believe that black and white can't coincide, this and that can't go together. And we no, we can. It can and it will and it does. And yes, the Candace and Elisa show, and it's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, it's on YouTube. So yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got very little time left. So I'm going to pass it to Elisa to tell me what she's been doing, what she plans to do, and then back to you, Candace, after that. Elisa.
So currently I'm working on something called the Feel Better Project, which is actually looking at the other side of the coin, which is the perpetrator side. It's going to be a documentary. At the moment, it's a website, thefeelbetterproject.co.uk. And it's just trying to understand what leads someone to committing violence and how is it that societally we can help people at that stage. So not wait for one perpetrator to have 6 victims, which is the statistic in the UK at the moment, but actually trace it back to how can we support this person at this level, because they are also more likely than not a hurting person, as we've talked about throughout before. So that's the current thing. And like Candace said, trying to get this show as strong and positive and, you know, out there as we can, and working together.
And hopefully you're going to be bringing your exhibition to South Africa when COVID is over.
Which it was supposed to go to Cape Town, but hello COVID. So hopefully when things start to ease, it'll go down there. Absolutely.
We certainly would want it to come here because there's so much we can all share. Candace, you do amazing things all the time. What's the next big one? What are the current ones?
Yeah, so I mean, as Elisa said, you know, we're trying to get this show up and running and in as many homes as possible. And another thing I'm doing is I'm a podcaster. So I've got a podcast called Coffee with Candace. I speak to remarkable people from across the world. Today I spoke to Evie Pompouris, who protected 4 US sitting presidents, and she's just a remarkable woman. So yeah, I'm trying to empower people in as many ways as possible. Oh, and I have a book, by the way, so go get that. Forgiveness Redefined, guys. Get my book.
There you go. Plug. But before, there we go. And Elisa's also got a book. So guys, go get the books, look them up. Difficult names to spell, but the name's up there so you can see it. And not Candace is less difficult.
And
I have to say, for the first time on air, I think Candace now is pronouncing Elisa's name correctly.
Thank you so much. Praise the Lord. Allah Buddha.
Because I always say Elisa. I'm South African. We always try to shorten it.
If there was one thing we've achieved tonight. No. And I know everybody's going to want to know how you two met and what work Elisa did in South Africa. And some of the people in her photographs are South African. And of course, she's now married to a wonderful South African, but they moved to the UK as COVID hit because both their careers needed that at that point. But hey, guys, there's so much more. Anyone out there, go and look these amazing women up. Support them. And thank you for sharing your lives, for baring your souls, and for taking us into a digital era where there's value, meaning, and profundity. I thank you once more and for the privilege of sharing your stories, entrusting me with the story and entrusting our audience with it. Thank you so, so much. And have a fabulous evening.
Thank you. It's been great. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Kobus Netling, and thank you very much for joining. Thank you also to all the technical help I've been receiving and the support group. Thank you very much. I hope you'll enjoy the next 45 minutes and also learn while you're watching. I've always believed that that learning happens in a sort of good way when you're enjoying what you're doing. So I'm going to journey with you and unpacking the 8-dimension brain and also the applications. For me, the importance of developing all these instruments over all these years, that you must be able to use it. If it's otherwise, it remains there and it sort of becomes a so what kind of thing. But I mean, let me start at the beginning. I often get the question, how did I get involved in this? Now, I think what you can take, I can take you back to when sort of I was growing up as a child and incredible parenting. But looking back, I think my mother represented the left brain in the family. She was orderly, she was a loving woman, but she was disciplined and everything had to be neat and precise. And that time was very important to her. My father, on the other hand, was in a sense the opposite. He was a brilliant sportsman, but he was sort of different. He did things that unexpected kind of things. I remember sitting at the dinner table at the evenings. We never knew what my father would do. We just never knew. He would come and sit down and then suddenly get up and he would do a handstand on the chair or something, or he would do 3 somersaults and then he would sit down. And then he would pick up a cup and we would start throwing it around to one another. At some stage, I thought probably all families did that when they sat down at dinner, but that was probably not the case. So when I began my study and research, I started at the University of Cape Town. I wanted to understand human potential. I wanted to understand what are we capable of becoming. I wanted to do that as a scientist. And I started focusing on young children. You see, as a scientist, it's kind of good to understand that when you're a child is between 0 and 3, it's the only time in your life that you are what we call a spontaneous human being. Psychologists call that the natural period. You're hiding nothing. You're showing the world exactly who you are. And it's wonderful because you get pure results. So I studied these children for years and years and years. And I did it in 15 countries. I did a comparative study. And what was amazing with these results, what do you get? What do you see? What is the sort of spontaneous potential of the human being? One of the things that we found, and I discovered, was that 98% of all young children between 0 and 3, and this was in all these countries, had creativity at a very superior level, at an amazing high level. That means everyone watching tonight, that when you were 0 to 3, you had this amazing creativity ability, creativity ability. Unfortunately, no one trains parents to observe and see what they're supposed to see. So they don't see it. So if you put a child down, a 9-month-old child down on the floor, for instance, and in your world, first thing you know, you don't know what that child will do. You're unpredictable. You're unpredictable. And so the child starts moving on the floor. And eventually all children will come to the edge. That's what we're supposed to do, to probe the edges, to find out what's beyond. But no one told your mother this. So what your mother does all over the world, and fathers, of course, will take you back to the middle of the room again. But your natural self will start moving again. Again, you brought back to the middle. And later on, they put cushions and pillows around you. It's like a little safe environment. So here in your brain, a little program has been formed that maybe it's not good to probe, not to discover, not to find out. And everything after that is sort of perpetuated in the same way. When you get your first coloring book, for instance, what are you told? Color inside the lines. Why not all over? Create all over. No, inside the lines. And then you go to school and there's only one answer. And so it carries on. This natural being, this discovery human being that we're supposed to be, just doesn't happen. So when we're 10, the follow-up studies, at the age of 10 or so, this 98% superior level drops to 32%. At 16, down to about 10% in adults throughout the world, and I've done this repeatedly, it's about 2%. But the wonderful thing is this, that you don't lose your creativity. We've worked with people in their 70s and 80s, and unbelievable what happens when we train them, because this is called deliberate creativity. How to get your creativity back, how to get this amazing mind back. And this is what I pursued. After my doctorate, I wanted to take this further. And I looked around and did a sabbatical. Where would the best place for me to probe this and to discover? And at that stage, the University of Georgia in the United States was the number one university because they had the number one person there. Professor Paul Torrance was regarded as the founding father of modern creativity, also regarded as Mr. Creativity of the 20th century. So I was incredibly blessed that he became my professor for a post-PhD, but he remained my mentor for more than 20 years until he died. He was my mentor. To be so close to this amazing man was unreal. And I remember his first words when he said, remember, creativity can be learnt and it can be taught. That was life-changing. You can teach people to get it back and they can learn it. That was life-changing. And so I did a post-PhD on the identification and development of creative behavior. And then after that, everything changed for me. And under his guidance, I started to develop this whole series of brain instruments. See if I can maybe just move up to the first slide now, if I can just find out how to do it. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. Yeah, let me start. I'd like to start talking about the history. I don't seem to find the first slide. Just see if I can get it. Let's start with the history. So it started when Paul Torrance, for instance, showed me a little instrument that he used. I'm seeing, let me just see if I'm still okay here, because I'm not sure that you're seeing the screen. But let me carry on. Under Paul Torrance's guidance, he opened up a two-sided instrument for me, left-right brain. And under his guidance, I started to unpack this, focusing on thinking preference. Because you see, that is the start, the beginning of our human beingness, is our thinking. It really doesn't matter in what religion you belong, what philosophy you believe in, they all say the same thing. To change as a human being, to become different, it has to happen in your thinking. That is the essence of the human being. The essence of the human being is your thinking. So that's where it starts. So I started to develop a four-quadrant instrument, an instrument where, I hope someone at the back can listen, because I'm not sure that you can see the screen. So I'd really like you to see the screen that I'm going to show you now. Starting with a four-quadrant. Let me just see, because it's really not working on my side. Not working on this side. Anyway, let me keep on talking until someone sorts it out for me. So the four-quadrant instrument, first of all, was an instrument probing the different ways that people prefer to think. And there are four of these different ways people prefer to think. And there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad in the thinking choices you make. The world around you, in a sense, determines your preferences. People influence you, and so on. And so I developed a whole series of four-quadrant instruments. Instruments for children, instruments for their... can we have the next screen, please? No, yeah, just there, thank you. So a whole series of instruments for adults and then for children. Because I wanted to understand, if I understand your preferred mode of thinking, then I, in a sense, can form a much better bond with you, a relationship with you. And to me, it was just so critical, not only for adults, because I did develop a whole series of instruments for adults, but also for children. Because you see, if I'm a teacher, for instance, and I want to teach a group of children, I need to understand that those children will have different thinking preferences. They would prefer to think differently. And I need to understand that. Because if you don't understand that, what will happen is you will only teach from your preferred mode of teaching. And in all our research, all our feedback shows this, that if you keep on, let's say, as a teacher, teach only from your preferred mode of thinking, you are missing 70% of the children in your classroom. And you can imagine the impact that it's had over years and years and years. The moment you understand, how can I, whatever you teach, how can I teach mathematics, for instance, using your whole brain, everything changes dramatically. A year or so ago, we worked in a school where the average for mathematics, for instance, was for years and years around about 20%. After 18 months of training or training these teachers how to train and teach mathematics with the whole brain, the 20% went up to 80%. You see, the important issue here is that we have our preferred mode of thinking. That's fine. There's no good or bad here. By the way, in all of my instruments, people get exactly the same score. You get 300. There's no good or bad here. The important thing is here that to have the ability to develop the ability to move in and out of your brain and preferred mode of thinking. Could we have the next slide, please? Here is a sort of a quick summary of the 8 dimensions, because what I later did, I cut and dissected these quadrants into 2 dimensions in each of these quadrants. So just have a look at the top left. The top left quadrant is called the L1 quadrant. The L1 quadrant, you find, first of all, you find the analyst and you find the realist. The analyst is the kind of person that likes to dig deeper, likes to probe, likes to find out, wants to monitor, go deeper and deeper. The realist in the same quadrant now is the one that likes clarity, doesn't like any clarity, likes to focus, define targets and so on, and works with information. If I, for instance, have a realist as a boss, and I want to convince that boss to accept my ideas, first of all, you'll never go hug that boss. But what you'll do, you'll find, you'll take clinical information, good information, facts to that person, and try to sort of persuade that boss or that person this is the way to go. So that what I'm trying to say here is that even if you're not an L1 person, you can move into, you learn how to move into that quadrant, and you can learn into that quadrant, move into that quadrant with greatest of ease to do that. It's not difficult to do that. It takes us about a day or 2 days to train people in any business, education, and sport to move in and out of those quadrants. The bottom quadrant is called the L2 quadrant. There are 2 there. There's a preserver and an organizer. And by the way, the L1 person, top left, that person doesn't like details. It's clinical. But the L2 person likes to have details. That is the person that would ask you to repeat what you just said. Just repeat it again. Say it again. Give me more information. That is your L2. It's the preserver. Is the one that is that sort of disciplined kind of person, likes tradition, likes things to say the same. So if changes are made in an organization or anywhere else, it takes longer in a sense to convince the preserver to move on. And you really have to have, the good sort of way to convince that person doesn't want to move away. The organizer is that person who likes that to do it in a step-by-step, likes the sort of routines, is the planner in the organization, or likes things to be in that kind of order. Time is important. That's the kind of teacher that will stand in front of the class and say, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. That is your L2 person. It's always good. There's also the action person often that likes to start doing things. On the right side, the bottom is interesting because that's your people's person. These are the people who get their energy from people. 2 types there. The empathizer, the sort of closeness people, likes to work with people, but not in big groups. Likes that sort of intimate closeness, the caring kind of people's person. And then you have the socializer, the person who's more in groups, likes intimacy with groups, entertaining, outgoing kind of, both people's people, but totally different. And in the top right, the R1 quadrant, there you have the Imagineer, the person who likes, to sort of have imaginations, this inner voice. That's the person, when you phone that person, will sit with a pen and doodle and do little things with a pencil or the pen, and doesn't zigzag, doesn't like the sort of step-by-step thinker. If you're an Imagineer and you have an L2 teacher, that Imagineer will never listen. Your mind will go all over the show. You'll fantasize and think of other things while that teacher is trying to teach you. And the strategist is that big picture kind of thing, the spatial thing. Those are the people that kind of see trends coming. They are people that can connect the dots and can see the future come before the future arrives. Again, there's no good quadrant or bad quadrant, but we all have our preferred ways of thinking. But we are in a world where we are, in a sense, forced to move in and out of these quadrants all the time. Let me give you a few examples, and I'm going to show you a few examples later on. Let's say you're a parent, for instance. Let's say you're an L2 parent, bottom left here. And that means fine. You like your discipline, your order, time is important, and so on. Now you've got 2 children. Little Johnny is exactly like you. Johnny comes home in the afternoon, puts his bag down, says, Mum, I've got a lot of homework, I've got to learn. He goes up to his neat room, got a little program there, and he studies, and 7 o'clock when you eat, Johnny's on time. And you say to your neighbor, oh, what a wonderful child this Johnny. But now your little daughter, 12 years old, comes home. She's totally opposite. She's an R1, top right. She comes home. She never puts her bag down. She just chucks it down. And then she's got one sentence for 12 years. A sentence is this: hey, Mum, I've got no homework. And she walks up to a room. There's chaos all over the show. And then music playing. And every time she runs down, she can't focus. And 7 o'clock, she's not there. And you say to your neighbor, oh, what did I deserve to have a child like that? Now, you see, the moment you're able, and then you'll have conflict, by the way. You'll have conflict forever. But if you can move and understand your child, R1 child, understand that language, and it's not difficult, everything starts to change. Now, I have 2 sons. When they were in the primary school, I developed the primary school instrument. I sat with both of them. They were 9 and 10 years old. I explained to them their profile. I first said, well done, you both got full marks, 300, ta-da-ta. And then I explained the differences. And I explained to them they would like different friends and different teachers and this with this. I explained this to them. Both my sons are now adults. And people who know them will tell you that not once in their life, not once, was there any conflict between them, any conflict. Because you see, if you understand this, there's not right or wrong. It's just different. But if you don't understand that the other one is always wrong and right. We've written books. I've written more than 90 books on these topics. One book is called Love, Sex, and the Brain. It's about relationships. It's exactly the same. Relationships are ruined, not because the one is bad and the other is good. It's because of this brain. The other one becomes wrong in your eyes. It's got nothing to do with that, you see. And this works for absolutely everything. There's nothing you can think of that this brain is not the point of departure. Everything. In business, we worked for 2 years when we trained the salespeople of BMW. We showed them how do you sell cars with your whole brain. You see, because if you don't understand this, what will happen? You will sell only from your dominance. So if you're down here at the bottom, the L2, and I come in and want to buy a BMW, immediately you as a salesperson will come up to me and say, yeah, sir, I see you're looking for a car, and so on. And then you go into details of how fast the car can go, and this and that, and goes on, and I stop him. Because I may be an odd one. I said, yeah, hey, I'm only looking for a blue one. I don't want all this other stuff. We train the people how to pick up the clue, immediately see that is an R1, and this is how you sell on the R1. We even train people on the phone how to pick up the clue and then sell and promote on the phone. And you can use this for anything. Once you understand the brain, your life changes forever. I can tell you this as a scientist, forever. In sport, we work with all international teams. We do the profiles of the teams, and we train them how to use their brain in different ways as they play sport. So I can carry on and carry on. But let's go to the next slide and maybe show you a few more applications. The next one. Yeah, it's a number of sort of applications that I just mentioned a few of them previously. For instance, as I mentioned, in parenting, in communication. Let me give you an example. Tim Odisi, one of our wonderful TV presenters and radio presenters, Tim came on our whole brain practitioners course. He wanted to understand the brain, and he wanted to also apply and use it. And so he was trained how to be able to use the whole brain. Tim went back. I think he was still at 702 those years. He took this brain, the circle that you can see in the middle there, he put it next to his microphone. Every time someone phoned in, Tim would listen and he would ask a question to it. He said, I'm talking to a L1. And L1 means then clinical information. So he talks a clinical information kind of language, talks factual language. And the person thinks, wow, I've got this bond with Tim. Tim understands me. Next person phones in, 1 or 2 questions. I'm speaking to an empathizer, bottom right here. Much more a soft and gentle sort of way of talking. 3 months later, Tim was voted South Africa's #1 talk show. This is exactly what happens when you begin to understand your own brain and you're comfortable with it. And then you begin to understand this sort of, you pick up the clues of people around you, or if you're in a business, you can actually do their profiles if you're a practitioner, and then sit and in teamwork and everything else. As I said, learning and teaching, all business. I'll show you a few examples in the field of medicine. On Tuesday, for instance, I'm doing a webinar with two of my doctor colleagues, and we're doing one just for doctors and nurses and dentists and whatever, on the brain of the doctor. So again, the applications are absolutely everywhere. Can we go to the next slide? Sorry, can we have the next slide? You see the background? Ah, there. No, go back to the, just go back one, yeah. One of the applications of the instruments, I've developed more than 30 of them, is to profile the brain of the job. Now, let me say something to you, which I think very, very important. Someone else said to me the other day that the recruitment world of recruiting people, it hasn't changed in 500 years. It's still this sort of job descriptions, 5, 6, 7 pages of woolly kind of information. It's old. It's outdated. It's not the way to, you don't do it that way anymore. What you need, Warren Buffett said many years ago, he said to have the best company, you need to appoint the right people. And that was elusive. What do you mean by the right people? The only way you can get to the right people, first of all, is to be able to understand that every job, like you have a brain profile, a preferred mode of thinking, a brain profile, every job also has a brain. So move away from these old-fashioned job descriptions and profile the brain of the job. And once you have the brain of the job, you can look at the people's brain profiles and see who fits the job. Because you see, if you don't understand that, you don't kind of have this as the point of departure, what will happen is that so many times people leave their own brain at home and they have to move into their job brain. They have no passion for it. They have no energy for it. And we did a survey some time ago about people and the passion they have for work. We found in a couple of companies, on average, only about 14% of people have really passion for the work they do because they're not in the right job. They're not in the right job. So it is critical to understand the brain of your job so that you know your brain and if you fit into this job. Many of the universities now, and one of them, the University of Columbia in New York, one of the top 5 in the world, they've been using our instruments for many, many years now, and as many others. So what is important when you're kind of looking ahead and say, what should I study? Where should I go to? And so on, is first to understand what are you good at. I would say the traditional way of looking at it was that you're good in bookkeeping, so they tell you, hey, become a bookkeeper. But then about 60 to 70% of students either change direction or they drop out. You see, you can't do that. You know, you need to know what you're good at and then look at your brain profile and then combine the two. And then you can say, these are the direct possible directions I should follow. Then that dropout drops from 65% to about 10 or 11%. You need to understand that. So before you choose where should I go to, look at the brain of the job, of the jobs that are out there, and look at your own brain and see where you fit in. It is critical. In 2020 and beyond, we can't do it in any other way anymore. It's the way we have to do. So let me show you, can we go to the next slide? Let me show you a couple of examples of jokes. Here we have an example of, let's say, that old-fashioned traditional managers that we had, and maybe many of them are still around, and then we have more the modern manager. The traditional manager was very much a left-brain manager. He was there, clinical, bottom line, make no mistakes. No mistakes are allowed, top one, the L1. And then the bottom, you follow the disciplines, you have routines, you monitor what people are doing, check if there's mistakes and so on. And nothing wrong with that kind of thing. But there's nothing on the right side of the brain, nothing. The modern manager is more someone, top right, more bit strategic, can see the kind of big picture, can maybe find new ideas, and also then can analyze at the same time, focus. Here at the bottom, which is important, but there you have people that can support you as a manager. You have people that work for you, that can fit into these other quadrants that is not your focus. Your focus is this more bigger picture, the strategy, and also at the same time to do that deep, digging deeper kind of thing in the organization. Can we have the next slide? Yes, interesting. Here's a couple. The first one is the nurse, and we've done so many profiles in hospitals and nurses and so on. And it's very interesting. So if that is the sort of interest that you have. The nurse, as you can see, is very strong. The bottom left, because for a nurse, you need to have you have to follow schedules. There's certain very specific routines that you've got to follow as a nurse, organized all the time. So very important. That L2, that you have a strong L2. At the same time, on the right side, the people side, you need to relate to your patients. But at the same time, so it's that organized routine, be able to follow routines, and then very closeness with your patient. But at the same time, this afternoon I had a lovely long discussion with probably the best general practitioner in South Africa. He's always booked out because the patients want to be with him, because he understands. He asks one or two questions and then he can pinpoint what quadrant that patient is. So he, as a general practitioner, can move into the patient's quadrant and explain to the patient what is wrong and what the procedures are, and they leave happy. And if you leave happy, in a sort of happy mood, your healing takes place so much quicker, because he knows exactly how to talk, how to explain. He moves around based on the patient's quadrant, and that is the same that the nurse needs to do. Then your PR specialist, pretty much also a people's kind of person, must be able to relate to people, must be organized on the left side, but also being able to relate to people. And then on the right side, the nursery school teacher, also very much R2. He has to be a strong people sensitivity with children sensitivity, but it's also an organized kind of world. It's an organized for that little children. You need to be also organized. There has to be discipline there, but at the same time, a soft and gentleness with the children that you teach. Can we have the next one? Can we move on? Yeah, I thought I'd like to show you. We've worked with nearly all the international teams in the world, all the big sporting teams and so on. Here you see AB de Villiers, one of the best cricketers we've ever produced, and we did a whole program, worked AB, and also that he supports whole brain in saying that you really can't be a superstar and break world records if you don't use your whole brain while playing cricket. On the right side is really his brain. It's the 2020 brain, and you remember he broke the world record hitting 100 runs in just over 30 balls. And so his preferred mode of thinking on the right now is the top right R1, which means that he's unorthodox. He does things in strange ways. He thinks on his feet. He comes up with creative ways of playing the game, and so on. He kind of expects the unexpected, and that's what the R1 does, and that's with AB de Villiers. But when he plays test match cricket, it's much more a sort of whole brain, sometimes being patient, sometimes being focused, and so on. So he moves around according to the situation, the test match or the 2020. Interesting enough, a couple of years ago, Gary Bailey helped me to develop the soccer instrument, because there's also this soccer instrument. And he's a very strong L2. And remember Gary Bailey, you can remember he was Manchester United and he was England's goalkeeper. Now, he's strong left brain. And he said to me, that's the perfect brain for a goalkeeper. Now, interesting, I listened to this, a perfect brain for a goalkeeper, because every position on the sports field requires a different way of thinking, a different kind of brain. Because left brain for a goalkeeper means that he can stay focused all the time throughout the match, 90 minutes, focused, the L1, and he can stay organized in the goal mouth, organized and focused. A perfect brain for the goalkeeper. He said the worst brain you can have for a goalkeeper is an R1 top right, because then you go daydreaming, fantasizing, whoops, there's the ball is passed. So every position on the field. Rugby, for instance, we worked with all the Springbok teams in the past, doing their profiles, and all the great players. So I wrote a book with Nas Booster called creative rugby, where we looked at every position on a rugby field, what kind of brain you really need to play in that position. And then also we worked with the sevens rugby teams that later became world champions, and we sort of asked ourselves, what brain do you need to play sevens rugby? If you kind of understand what sevens rugby is. Very strong L1, because you can't ever lose focus if you're playing sevens rugby. Just few players on this big field. And on the right-hand side, top right, you need to see space all the time. So those two we focused on, and it was amazing how these players developed eventually into world champions. Can we have the next slide, please? I'd like to show you very briefly. I'm not going to elaborate here. Those of you interested in becoming whole brain practitioners who really want to do the profiles of people, start using this 8-dimensional brain in your work, whatever your work is. Just to give you an idea that there are 30, all these instruments are to your disposal. You can use any of these. There on the left-hand side is an old series of these instruments. I even have an instrument now for young children before they go to school. It's a kindergarten, for kindergarten, it's a picture instrument. So they choose pictures, and as they choose pictures, we can actually profile them. We can tell or explain to their parents or teachers, before you put this child on Ritalin, just have a look at the brain preferences, because maybe this child only needs different kind of stimulation, and not to put him on medication and so on. So there's a whole sort of array of instruments on that side. On the business side, there's really a lot of these instruments on the business side. I talked about the job instrument, client instruments. There's just so many of them that we use in business. There's a leadership. You see, interesting enough that sometimes people leave their natural, who they are, natural profile when they go into a certain role. We have seen this, that very kind, generous kind of people, when they become a leader, they often become this kind of obnoxious people. They leave who they really are. We often ask children, what profile do you think your parents are? And very often we find that parents also, they leave their natural profile. For instance, an R1 parent, more this big picture, doesn't care kind of parent. And then as a parent, you go into the L2 mode, you become disciplined, careful, and so on. And you don't even realize that you're doing this. So it's kind of important to understand that we do sometimes take over a role when we, okay, can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, I mentioned education, and this is a very, very important one. As I say, we've trained so many teachers now, train how to teach with your whole brain. As I say, it doesn't matter what subject you're teaching. And we've had absolutely amazing, amazing results where teachers are able then to teach any subject 8-dimensionally. And you can make sure. One of my books I wrote many years ago is called Am I Clever or Am I Stupid? And the reason I wrote this book is because so often children see themselves as only average or mediocre or stupid even. And often it's got nothing to do with them. Often the teaching dominance of the teacher never reached the child's learning dominance. And so it just passes by. And you have this label, and often it stays with you through adulthood, and you need to shake it off. You need to just get rid of that kind of label that you think you had of mediocre or stupid or whatever. And then the right-hand side, as I said, all these sport instruments that we used over years, and very, very successfully with many, many, many teams. Then can we get to the next slide, please? Now this, just keep that slide for a second. I'm going to end off and sort of elaborate a little bit on the slide that will follow this one, which is critically important. Because I've explained to you now that you develop these favorite parts of the brain, and that's fine. But the world demands of us to move in and out. And the moment you begin to understand that, your life changes absolutely forever. And it doesn't matter what you do, what your job is, whatever, it changes forever. You have this kind of flexibility of mind that is so special, so special. And it is critical to understand that it is necessary to do that. The word beyonder that you see on the screen is a very special word. I started off by saying that my mentor, Paul Torrance, one of the founding fathers of modern creativity, he was also the one that coined this word, beyonder, because you won't find it in the dictionary. You won't find it there. You find beyond or beyondness, but you won't find beyonder. It's not there. It's not there. He came to sort of create this word after following a group of 400 children for more than 30, up to nearly 40 years. Started in 1958, He tested them in many ways, followed them, retested, and so he went on. And it ended here in 1998, around about there, this survey ended. 40 years. These children were now in their 40s, in their middle and late 40s. And then you asked the question, Paul Torrance, and I was very sort of involved in the last 10 years of the study. Paul Torrance asked the question, how many became beyonders and what were their qualities? And then Paul Torrance died. The university actually endorsed us to carry on with this program. And what is amazing, these qualities that these beyonders had, that in his words made dents in the universe, was kind of ordinary qualities. And I'm not going to talk about them tonight, but it's kind of unbelievable. How do I become a beyonder? How do I become this person that can do this? This sort of kind of qualities that we all have, but it's just hidden. And one of those qualities of the beyonder is someone that is able to stay above the line. It's critical to understand that. So let's move to the next slide, because the one that is following now, I'd like you to take with you forever. What does this slide say to us about thinking and who we are? I started off by saying that thinking is our essence. It's who we are. It's our thinking. It's our thinking. So we can choose different kinds of thinking, those models I showed you, but your thinking can also be below the line, or your thinking can be above the line. And no one can choose your thinking for you. No one. You choose it. And therefore you can't blame anyone for the thinking you choose. You can't blame anyone for the thinking you choose. And that is, to me, after all these years, the difference between people and people. Those who blame and those who don't blame, and they are free. I remember, I think it was an interview between Nelson Mandela and Bill Clinton, when Bill Clinton asked him, and they were good friends, don't you hate and curse, blame the people that put you in jail? And Nelson Mandela looked at him, shook his head, he said, you know, Bill, you don't understand, because if I blame them, they're still up here and they still control me. I'm free. They're gone. You see, that's what it is. Difference between people and people. Those who don't blame, they're free, they're liberated. So what can thinking do to you? Because it's so powerful. First of all, you can choose thinking right at the bottom there that can make you a tormented human being. That's the kind of human being when you start to curse the world. Everything is terrible out there. And especially the past few months, we've seen this happen more and more. And one morning you wake up angry, and you've become an angry human being, and you start taking victims with you. It's a terrible state to be in. And this is, by the way, all these states can be reversed. The second level, there's paralysis, when you choose a kind of thinking that takes all your energy out of you, takes everything out of you. You've lost your zest for life. That is when in your thinking, you start to convince yourself there's no future for you. There's nothing out there for you. So you go through the motions of life, but in a sense, there's nothing left. We see it more and more, by the way, amongst teenagers the past few months and the past year or so. It is a terrible state to be in, and again, it can be reversed. When you start creating future images that start to pull you, everything changes. The third level is negativity, and maybe more dangerous than all the others, because negativity spreads so quickly. It can manifest in many ways, the way you talk. And there are 10 of these. You blame, you curse, you complain, and so on. And what you're doing then, without you realizing it, you're recreating your brain into a problem brain. Everything that comes into your brain is a problem. And that, again, is a terrible state to be in. Because then you can't see any solutions. Everything is a problem. You've reprogrammed your brain into a problem. And again, you know, when you move away from it and you understand how to do it, it's unbelievable what happens to you. I remember that some time ago, we took 600 women that sell directly to the public. They were in this below the line state negative. We took them through a 2-day program of ours. Then I put them on a program. You can see this this series of diaries, but this one, 29-day diary, put it in their pocket. And every time they had a negative thought, they had to reverse that thought. And then we put them through our program, and then we monitored them after the 29 days. Their sales immediately went up by 57%. You see, there's no problem left. They could see possibilities. They could see solutions. They were blocking their own brain. Unbelievable. We use these little books in all the international teams that we work with. They put it with them. They put it in their pocket when they tour to make sure that they don't go into this negative below the line state. Because it's not your body that loses with these sports people. It's your mind that starts to lose, and that's when you lose. Every sport. The last level below the line, negative stress. Probably 95, 96% of people who suffer from stress cannot be cured by medication. Short period maybe. But your negative stress comes from distorted thinking that you choose. We've identified 10 of these distortions. The moment you can identify your distortion, it can be cured. Let me give you one. The one is called exaggerated thinking. When you make things that happen to you much bigger than they are. You make it more important than what they are. Someone insults you and it stays with you. It's nothing, but you keep it here. Tomorrow morning, it's still there and something small happens. Again, you make it bigger. And in a week, you're so stressed out. You just had it. You lost all your energy. And then you wonder, where did it come from? It comes from you making things that happen to you much bigger. And that is also for like the past 4 months. That you've made it everything. And it totally controlled you. Best way it was ever explained to me happened a couple of years ago. I spent a whole day on this model because this is life. You can spend weeks on this. A woman came to me at the end, smiling. She says to me, you know, I feel liberated and free now. I've been below this line now for the past 4 months. Because I was supposed to marry a man, and just before supposed to marry, he left me. And now I know what I did. I kept him here for 4 months. I kept him here. He didn't say stay up. I kept him. And he's out. He's gone. He's out of my mind. And then she said this, something I'll never forget. She said to me, you know what I did? I confused a moment in my life with life. And this is what we do all the time. We confuse a little setback or a big setback or even the past 4 months or so. It's not life. It's a moment in life and we have to deal with it. And the moment we start dealing with it as a moment, everything changes. My friends, the whole brain beyond a person that can tackle the future and see the future before it arrives cannot be below this line. Cannot be. But the moment you anchored above this line, the creative perspective, when you see the bigger picture, you see moments as moments, life is life, everything changes for you. Everything changes. That is when like a taxi cuts you off and your first response is anger. You say, no, now you know, it's below the line, you don't want to go there. But there's always an opposite. Is it difficult? Sure, in the beginning, it's very difficult, but choose the opposite, choose patience, just walk away. And tomorrow again you do it. And after a couple of days or a week or so, you'll find that your default has changed. You go immediately to the patient brain and not to the anger brain. And this is how people become different people. This is how people become liberated, free. And all these other things then move up. It comes automatically, your joy or passion. You see, my friends, none of you, not one of you, were born below this line. Not one. No child is below the line. I studied children for years and no one. It is all these thinking choices that we make that actually take us below the line. I've seen over the years now in the companies where we worked, and this was always part of our training, the amazing sort of cultural changes that happens. They put this out in every meeting. So they don't allow in any meeting that anyone goes below the line in a nice, gentle way. It's prodded to go up, and you find ways there, and then your culture changes and you changes. I've seen that people put it up in their bathroom to make sure they leave the day. When they leave to go to work, they leave above the line. They're anchored there. I see it in organization everywhere, in the walls everywhere. Later on, it's you. It's your new DNA, your default. And I think that's probably the only way to tackle the future. The whole brain that I've just explained to you, and then anchoring above the line. Let me give you an example of Paul Torrance, that I mentioned right at the beginning. And I've got thousands of examples. Paul Torrance had a stroke. I had to leave the US to come to South Africa, but I went back after about 2-3 months immediately. When I arrived in Georgia, I went right immediately to his house. He opened the door, and I was kind of surprised. Here he was, after the severe stroke that he couldn't talk. He was paralyzed. He's perfect. I was excited, and he was trying to explain to me how he managed to, in a sense, redesign the parts of the brain that was damaged, and other parts of the brain took over these functions, and so on. But that wasn't it. He said, "Come on, I'd like to show you something." We walked to his study. He was saying to me, the past 3 months while I was a stroke patient, I realized that there are probably tens of thousands of people in the world in similar circumstances. Change this, had to change their routines, do things differently, and so on. And then we walked into his study. And there on the table was a book that he wrote and published in the 3 months while he was a stroke patient. And the book was called A Recipe Book for Stroke Patients. Now you see, that's the difference between below the line, sulking, cursing the world, but above the line, getting a stroke and saying, "Wow, what an opportunity, what possibilities." Being in this pandemic and saying, "Wow, man, so many opportunities, possibilities." But you can only get that right if you're anchored above the line. So don't take another step. Wake up. When you wake up tomorrow morning, say to yourself, today is the first day of my above the lineness. Thank you all for watching. Can we get the next slide, please? I can just end off and close. If any one of you are interested in just finding out more, how you can do your own brain profiles, having a look at it, or you want to be trained as practitioners, maybe online training as practitioners, whatever you'd like to know, you've got the numbers there. I can say that absolutely, that my life, when I went to Georgia, I already had a doctorate. But I can truly say that I have a before life and an afterlife, and these things became part of my life. It changed my life absolutely forever. Take care out there, and many blessings to all of you. Thank you.